I skulk in the rafters of the dimly lit study, watching with a mixture of disdain and dark amusement as my so-called master fumbles yet another cantrip. Below me, the young wizard's hands tremble over a candle flame that stubbornly refuses to ignite. His brows knit in frustration, sweat beads on his ruddy forehead. Whoosh, a sudden burst as the spell misfires, and he yelps, shaking burnt fingertips. I choke back a gravelly chuckle. This is the mighty sorcerer who bound me. A mortal whelp who can't even light a tallow candle without singing his own tunic. He doesn't know I'm watching. I've made myself invisible in the shadows, a little trick I mastered ages before he was whelped. The smell of scorched hair and embarrassment rises from below. Biting down a sarcastic remark, I silently reposition, my clawed feet gripping an old ceiling beam. Every time he fails, and it is every time, a satisfying little thrill dances in my chest. I live for these small humiliations. It's the closest thing to joy in this servitude, witnessing the ineptitude of the one who dares call himself my master. Blasted spell. Must be the draft in here, he mutters to himself, voice echoing in the cluttered room. I see him glance around suspiciously. Familiar, show yourself. Did you snuff out the flame on purpose? His tone is accusatory, petulant like a child who suspects the family dog of eating a dropped morsel. I permit myself a toothy grin, unseen, of course. The thought had crossed my mind, but this time I needed do nothing at all. His own incompetence was the culprit. I drop from the rafter and become visible a few paces behind him, landing cat quiet on the stone floor. I live only to serve, master. I purr in a rasping voice, bowing low. The motion is half sarcasm, half genuine compulsion. At 2 feet tall, my bow brings my hooked nose an inch from the dusty floor. Shall I try to light the candle for you? I ask, careful to keep any open mockery out of my tone. Inside, I'm laughing. If he knew how each obsequious word dripped with venom behind my fanged smile. He huffs and waves a hand. No, I'll do it myself. Stay back. He straightens his scorched robes and squares his shoulders, determined to salvage his pride. I retreat into the half-dark at the edge of the room, obediently folded into a crouch, wings tucked, tail curled around my clawed feet. My yellow eyes never leave him. There is a tense sort of silence as he draws a deep breath and tries the incantation again, carefully enunciating each syllable this time. I can sense the threads of magic gathering sloppy, weak, but there. Come now, fool, I think. 3rd time's the charm. A spark catches on the wick. The candle sputters, then finally a flame takes, wavering but alive. My master exhales in relief, shoulders sagging. He's smiling proudly at that inch of fire, as if he'd just invoked a grand conflagration. There we are, he says softly, perhaps to reassure himself. There we are indeed. My lips curl in a silent sneer. Such triumph over the most trivial of spells. It would be pathetic if it weren't so. Entertaining. This is my life now. Bound by pact to an inept apprentice barely worthy of the title wizard. I hide my contempt behind a facade of dutiful silence, but every flicker of that candlelight paints dancing shadows of my true feelings on the stone walls. I am patient. I am very patient. Watching him struggle through each day's paltry lessons is a cruel lullaby of frustration, one that almost lulls me into a dark, dreamy calm. Almost, because beneath that calm, my hatred coils. Awake and hungry, I bide my time, sharpening my quiet disdain into a dagger of resolve. One day, when he least expects it, I'll do more than snuff out a candle. One day, I will snuff out him. It was not always like this. There was a time just weeks ago, though it feels like ages, when I was free in the dark of the lower plains, answering to no one but my own whim. All that changed on the night he summoned me. I remember it vividly. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and sulphurous incense. Midnight silence hung over the tiny cellar where the deed was done, broken only by the crackle of enchantment and my master's shaky voice chanting words he barely understood. He had prepared a summoning circle on the floor, painstakingly inscribed in chalk and blood. Candles guttered at each cardinal point, their feeble flames painting the stone walls in sickly orange hues. The coppery scent of a small animal's freshly spilled blood, a chicken perhaps, or a stray cat, whatever unfortunate creature he'd sacrificed, crawled up my nostrils even across the planar divide. Yes, I felt the pull before I saw anything, a tugging at the essence of my being, as if invisible hooks were sinking into my flesh. One moment I was skulking in the endless night of the abyss, minding my own malicious business. The next, yoink, some unseen force wrenched me through a howling void. With a roar of displaced air and a shower of red sparks, I was torn from my realm and deposited into his pathetic little circle. The transition was agonizingly sudden. One instant, I tasted the ashen winds of the abyss. The next, I was choking on stale basement air and the stench of mortal fear. Dazed and enraged, I shrieked and lunged immediately for the throat of the fool who dared drag me here, only to be stopped short. My claws slammed against an invisible barrier at the circle's edge, sending out a spray of blue sparks. The binding runes flared to life beneath my feet, locking me in place. He squealed in fright and stumbled back, nearly knocking over one of his candles. For a heartbeat, our eyes met across the glowing barrier. Him, a gangly youth in threadbare robes, pupils pinpricks of terror. Me, a snarling fiend silhouetted in hellish light. Every ounce of my being boiling with hatred. I threw myself at the barrier again and again, testing the magical chains that now bound me. Each attempt sent a jolt of searing pain through my body, forcing a howl from my throat. The pain was excruciating, a fiery collar tightening around my neck with every act of defiance. He had set the parameters of my imprisonment well. As inexperienced as he was, the summoning spell he'd used was thorough in its cruelty. After a few futile attempts, I collapsed to one knee in the center of the circle, panting. My vision swam with rage and the lingering afterimage of arcane sigils. Across the chalk lines, I heard the wizard let out a shuddering breath. Slowly, he crept closer, marveling that his ritual had actually worked. I could see the disbelief and delight warring on his face. To him, I must have been a prize proof of his newfound power. To me, he was nothing but a loathsome jailer, flush with undeserved pride. He raised a trembling hand, murmuring a binding word to seal our pact. The very sound of it forced my head low against the cold floor, as if a weight pressed down. The chains of magic sunk deep into my being, linking me to the will of this boy wizard. I growled, a low rumble of promise that this was not over. But for now, I was caught fast like a wolf in a snare. I am a Quasit, a minor demon of the abyss, no taller than a human toddler. My skin is a mottled green-gray, stretched taut over a wiry frame studded with warts and spines. A pair of thin, leathery ears fan out from my horned head, twitching at the slightest sound of sorcery. Behind me sways a barbed tail, serpentine and restless, its tip dripping with venomous ichor. My eyes, twin embers, glowing a sullen red fix on the young mage with ancient malice. At that moment, as the spell's final syllables faded, he finally stepped close enough to see me clearly. The flicker of the candles cast me in a fiendish light. I could smell his fear spiking sharp and sour when he took in my full, unsettling visage. His triumph was tempered by terror. He knew that one misstep in his incantation would have meant his throat in my jaws. But luck, or perhaps some cruel god's humor, was with him. The binding held. "There, it is done," he whispered, as much to himself as to me. Peering down, he forced a shaky smile. "Demon, I am your summoner and master. You will obey me." He was trying to sound authoritative, but I heard the quaver in his voice. I could smell the adrenaline, see his knees still subtly quivering from the near brush with death. I pressed my forehead to the floor in a show of begrudging submission, hiding the fury in my eyes. "By the pact sealed in blood, I am bound to you," I replied in a gravelly voice that echoed in the small cellar. The magic forced the words from my throat, a compelled response. Each syllable tasted like ash and acid. I lifted my gaze just enough to watch him through the greasy strands of my hair. He looked so young, barely a man, with downy stubble and ink-stained fingers. How easy it would have been to tear him apart had he not ensnared me in this circle. The very thought made my claws itch. He swallowed hard and nodded, attempting to look grave and wise.
"Good,"
he said, almost in relief. Then, with the arrogance only a novice could possess, he actually stepped across the chalk lines and into the circle with me. For a split second, my heart leapt. Was he truly so foolish? If his protections lapsed for even an instant, I could rend him limb from limb before he uttered a sound. My muscles coiled, ready to spring. But as he crossed into the circle, I felt the bindings constrict around me, preventing even the thought of striking him. I could do nothing but remain kneeling as he loomed over me, examining his new prize. He reached out a hand as if to touch me, then thought better of it. Instead, he produced a small dagger and quickly pricked his thumb. A bead of his blood welled up. He pressed it to my forehead where a faint rune glowed, the final act to complete the oath. The hot, coppery smear of his blood on my skin made me snarl in reflex, but the deed was done. The binding rune flared, and then sank invisible under my skin. Our pact was sealed, my will entwined and enslaved to his. A tiny, triumphant grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Welcome to the mortal realm, Quasit. You will serve me, and in return, I shall grant you, a reprieve from the abyss." Grant me a reprieve? The pompous little tick, as if being torn from my home and shackled to his side were some kind of favor. I nearly spat in his face, but the binding burned in warning. So I merely bowed my head deeper and rasped, "Yes, master." The words echoed strangely in the chamber, and for a moment even the candles flickered low, as if the darkness itself recoiled at my servile tone. He let out a breath he'd been holding and quickly stepped back out of the circle. With a wave of his hand and a poorly pronounced command word, the chalk lines of the summoning circle vanished. I was free to move beyond that small ring at last, yet not free at all. The invisible leash of his will tugged at my very essence. I rose slowly to my feet, my eyes never leaving him. How I hated him in that moment, more intensely than I have ever hated anything across my centuries of existence. I hated his shaking hands and his self-satisfied smirk. I hated the fear in his eyes because he was afraid, even if he tried to hide it. And I hated that beneath that fear, a spark of ambition was growing now that he had a demon at his beck and call. Chains of binding, visible only in the ethereal plane, coiled around my limbs like spectral snakes. I could feel them, even if I couldn't see them. With one last disdainful look around the dingy cellar, the place of my captivity, I followed my new master up the stairs into the world above, each step heavy with the promise of future vengeance. The days that followed were a grotesque comedy of errors. If there exists a catalogue of humiliations for a bound demon, I have tasted them all. He wasted no time in putting me to work, reveling in the novelty of having a fiendish servant. For me, each task was salt in the wound of my pride, yet by the pact's power, I was compelled to obey his commands, however trivial or demeaning. Mornings began with the clatter of his boot on my back. Yes, you read that correctly. The first dawn, after my summoning, I woke to find he had tethered me by a chain to the foot of his bed like some watchdog, and he accidentally stepped on me getting up. "Oops," he said, not sounding sorry at all. He quickly untied the chain after that, perhaps realizing that physically chaining a shape-changing demon was both unnecessary. The magical bond ensured I couldn't flee far, and risky. The look I gave him made him blanch. I was pleased to note. Still, the tone was set. From that moment, I was treated as somewhere between a lowly servant and a hazardous pet. He lives, or rather, we live, in a cramped attic loft above an apothecary's shop in town, a temporary abode until he gains enough skill, or coin, to join a proper wizard's guild or purchase a tower of his own. The place is a mess of scattered scrolls, half-empty potion bottles, and dusty tomes. And it became my duty, of course it did, to keep it all tidy. Can you imagine? A demonic familiar on hands and knees, scrubbing floors and organizing herb racks. He even had me sweep bat guano out of the rafters. The irony of a demon cleaning up bat droppings is not lost on me. One day, as I was on a stool dutifully alphabetizing his scroll collection, he clapped his hands excitedly. "Familiars are supposed to assist in magical experiments, yes?" he said, eyes gleaming with an idea. I froze halfway through, sorting scroll of minor illusion and scroll of mending. That tone in his voice boded ill. "I've been working on a new potion," he continued, already rummaging through glass vials on his workbench. "A draft of enhanced intellect. Perhaps you could sample it for me." Before I could protest, he thrust a beaker of fizzing purple liquid into my clawed hands. The fumes curling off of it smelled of nutmeg, burned hair, and something distinctly acidic. I eyed the concoction warily. Being immune to most poisons, I wasn't afraid it would kill me, but the potential side effects. "Drink up," he insisted, practically bouncing on his heels with eagerness. With a silent curse in abyssal, I raised the beaker to my lips and downed it in one gulp. It was vile, like chugging spoiled milk mixed with hot pepper and broken glass. I gagged, clenching my teeth to keep the liquid down. Across from me, my master leaned forward anxiously. "Well, do you feel smarter?" he asked. I opened my mouth to unleash a scathing reply, and promptly belched out a cloud of noxious green smoke. The smoke formed itself into the shape of a question mark in the air. Then my stomach began to churn. Oh no. I clapped my hands over my mouth and bolted for the window. I made it just in time to disgorge the entire contents of my stomach into the alley below in a gruesome splatter. Above me, the green smoke question mark popped like a soap bubble. From inside, I heard the wizard sigh. "Back to the drawing board," he murmured, utterly failing to offer so much as a sorry. I wiped my mouth, tail lashing in irritation. "Enhanced intellect potion." Right. If anything, that brew had briefly turned me into an idiot for agreeing to drink it. That entire afternoon, I suffered waves of stomach cramps that left me curled in a ball under the desk while he scribbled, "Potion number 7, failed," in his notes. Humiliating. And that was but one example. Each day presented fresh indignities. He bid me take on the form of a spider to crawl under the floorboards and clear out a nest of rats that had taken up residence. Yes, a demon reduced to pest control duty. I grudgingly obliged, shape-shifting into a tiny, long-legged arachnid. The task itself wasn't hard. I spooked the rats with a flash of my true form, and they scattered. But upon crawling back out, one of the shop's customers spotted me skittering along and promptly stomped on me with a boot, thinking I was just a common pest. The look on that poor man's face when the squished spider transformed back into a demon at his feet. I'll admit that one was almost worth it for the scream and apology that followed. My master scolded me afterward for frightening the customers, as if I had planned it. Then there was the matter of his private studies. Being a level 1 wizard with delusions of grandeur, he was always trying spells well above his capability. On one occasion, late by candlelight, he attempted a summoning spell from a forbidden grimoire he'd picked up, gods know where. "Stand ready and do as I say," he instructed me, brandishing a book whose pages reeked of dark magic beyond his ken. He had the nerve to use me as a bodyguard in case his spell went awry. I should have let it, but my own survival instinct kicked in. I recognized the incantation and knew if he mispronounced even a syllable, we'd have a much bigger problem than a Quasit in this room. Sure enough, his attempt to summon a minor hellhound went disastrously wrong. He mangled the infernal words, and instead of a hellhound, a chittering horde of abyssal roaches poured forth from the summoning circle. Dozens of thumb-sized, fiery-eyed bugs swarmed the floor, walls everywhere, biting and burning everything they touched. The wizard screamed, high-pitched, terribly undignified, and leapt onto a chair. "Do something!" he shrieked at me, as if this weren't entirely his fault. I was already on it more for my own sake than his. In truth, the roaches weren't dangerous to me, but I could imagine the mess if they escaped this attic and infested the town. Then the witch hunters would come, and that would complicate my plans. With a feral grin, I shifted into my toad form, a disgusting but useful shape. In that squat, warty body, I began flicking out an elongated tongue, snatching the infernal roaches out of the air one by one and swallowing them whole. Crunch, gulp. Their bitter, burning ichor down my throat was revolting but strangely satisfying as their struggling ceased. Within a minute, I had devoured every last one. I belched out a small puff of brimstone-laced smoke and returned to my normal form, patting my belly theatrically. He climbed down from the chair, visibly shaken. The attic was trashed, charred bug husks and scorch marks everywhere, but catastrophe had been averted, thanks to me. And what thanks did I get? "You ate them? he sputtered, looking at me with a mix of horror and awe. Better than letting them feast on you, master, I replied with a thin smile, wiping a bit of glowing goo from my lips. He didn't have a retort to that. Instead, he slumped against the wall, suddenly looking very young and very small, and whispered, "I could have died. I could have let you," I thought bitterly, as I nodded in false sympathy. But I need him alive at least for now. So I simply said, "Yes, but you have me to watch over you," and I gave a little bow. Inside, I felt a curious shift. I realized I meant those words on more than one level. Not all our misadventures were so harrowing. Some were downright farcical. Like the time he tried to impress a visiting noblewoman, one of the apothecary's wealthy clients, by showing off his exotic familiar. He commanded me to put on a show of obeisance and trickery. I was made to juggle skulls, actual human skulls he kept for components, while dancing a jig and reciting a rhyme in Infernal. I have never been so mortified. The noblewoman clapped politely but looked more confused than impressed. Perhaps the sight of a demon skipping in a circle was not the aphrodisiac he hoped it'd be. After she left, he had the audacity to blame me for not being entertaining enough. I very nearly broke out in laughter at that, as if I were the reason his wooing failed and not his own awkward, sweaty attempts at conversation. Through all these daily torments, I maintained my subservient facade, but my resentment burned hotter with each indignity. It would have been easy to let that hatred consume me into foolish action. I certainly wanted to tear his head off on a daily basis, but I restrained myself. Though physically he never harmed me beyond the occasional accidental kick or magical backlash. Each casual command, each disregard for my autonomy was a whip across my pride. Still, I endured. In the quiet moments when I was alone scrubbing cauldrons or tidying his books, I found myself plotting. I catalogued his weaknesses, his routines, the gaps in his knowledge. Every misstep of his taught me something useful. How far I could stretch the literal wording of his commands, how inattentive he was after midnight, how he held his focus stone in his left hand but never his right. These little observations were strands in a web I was slowly, carefully weaving around him. For now, I played the role of the suffering, dutiful familiar, but I knew an opportunity would come. And when it did, I would be ready to strike. After a particularly disastrous incident in which a miscast illusion left him blind for an hour, don't ask it involved a misdrawn rune and a rather angry minor sprite. My master sank into a rare moment of self-doubt. He sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his temples, and I saw moisture at the corners of his eyes. Frustration, humiliation, loneliness, a toxic cocktail of emotions swirled in him. And in that moment, I made a decision. Brute force would not win me freedom. Not yet. Cunning would. I needed to earn his trust completely, to befriend him even, if I ever wanted him to drop his guard. The long con began in earnest that night. I approached him slowly, making sure my clawed footsteps were audible so as not to startle him. "Master," I said softly, with as much gentle concern as a gravelly demonic voice can convey, "you pushed yourself too hard today." He looked up, surprised. I had never spoken out of turn with him, unless spoken to first. Before he could snap at me, I offered a clean cloth, one I'd fetched to wipe a spill earlier, toward his face. "Your eyes," I indicated. He hesitated, then took the cloth to dab at the dampness. "I'm fine," he insisted, voice faltering. a blatant lie. He wasn't fine at all. His confidence was in shambles. But instead of agreeing, I remained silent, respectful, present. That night I fetched him a blanket when he fell asleep at his desk, face planted in an open tome. I could have smothered him with it. The thought did flash through my mind as I draped it over his slumped shoulders, but I resisted. There are other ways to kill a man than choking the breath from him. I was opting for a slower method, one that required patience. From that day on, I altered my demeanor. I became helpful. Oh, not in an obvious, fawning way that might have spooked him. No, I was subtle. I started by organizing his reagents in a more intuitive order after cleaning, so he wouldn't fumble during spellcasting. When he asked for the Eye of Newt or a sprig of belladonna, it was suddenly right where he needed it, right when he needed it. He noticed. "Thank you," he mumbled once, a bit awkwardly, after I wordlessly handed him the correct potion vial amidst a particularly frantic search. I merely nodded and stepped back, hiding the small spark of satisfaction that his thanks gave me. I flattered him, but carefully, and only when deserved, or when he thought it was deserved. If he successfully cast even a simple spell, I would remark in a low, appreciative tone, "Your power grows, Master. The flame burns brighter today." Such a simple comment, yet I could see how it straightened his posture, how he puffed up ever so slightly with pride. Demons are adept at temptation, and flattery is often the first taste. He drank it in like fine wine. Not all was mere words. I also began to save him deliberately and discreetly. On a trip to the market, a cut purse attempted to relieve him of his coin purse. I, prowling at his heels like a dutiful hound, saw the thief's hand before my master even realized what was happening. Quick as a blink, I turned invisible, darted behind the thief, and gave him a good hard bite on the backside. The man yelped and took off, never knowing what bit him. My master only caught a glimpse of the scoundrel fleeing. "What happened?" he asked, bewildered, feeling his untouched purse. I dropped the invisibility and shrugged innocently. "Perhaps he recognized you as a formidable wizard and thought better of his crime," I suggested. A ridiculous notion, but delivered earnestly enough. My master blinked, then actually laughed. "Formidable wizard, eh?" he echoed, clearly tickled by the idea. "Maybe one day." For the first time, I managed to coax a genuine laugh out of him. It was an oddly human sound that momentarily cut through my cynicism. I almost felt a pang. But no, demons don't feel guilt for manipulating mortals. That laugh, and the nascent camaraderie it implied, was simply another tool for me to exploit. Over weeks, our rapport shifted. He began to ask my opinion on minor things. Which robes should I wear to meet the magistrate? I chose the black ones. It never hurts to cultivate a dramatic image. Or, do you think adding powdered silver would stabilize this mixture? I nodded, and it indeed did, averting another explosion. Each time my advice proved sound, his trust in me deepened. He started calling me by a name of his choosing, since my true name is, of course, a demonic utterance he couldn't pronounce, and I'd never reveal it regardless. He dubbed me Scriv, short for Scrivener, because I began helping him copy spells and notes neatly. My clawed handwriting is surprisingly elegant when I make the effort. Scriv. The nickname somehow made me seem more his like a pet. I swallowed my bile and answered to it. With trust came privilege. He no longer bound me to a post at night or warded the doors against me. By the second month of our uneasy partnership, he even allowed me to roam the attic and adjacent rooms freely, and on a rare occasion, to accompany him outside after dusk without a literal leash of magic pulling me back. The invisible tether was slackening as his confidence in my loyalty grew. I made sure to appear utterly content with my lot. I performed little kindnesses, bringing him hot tea during late-night study sessions. A trick, I spat in it to add a bit of demonic essence that would keep him awake and alert longer. He thought it was the caffeine, or humming a low, soothing, abyssal lullaby when he was too anxious to sleep. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with an inscrutable expression, as if trying to puzzle me out. I kept my face carefully neutral or mildly pleasant whenever I could sense his eyes. Let him wonder if the big bad demon might actually care for him. Let him think he'd tamed me. He also began to reveal things, small, personal things at first. In a rare moment of candor, after 2 glasses of wine, his tolerance was non-existent. He admitted that he'd resorted to summoning a Quasit because he felt looked down upon by the other apprentices at the academy. They all got mundane animal familiars, a raven, a cat, an owl, traditional and safe, but he, headstrong and eager to prove himself, wanted something more impressive. A demonic familiar would surely turn heads. It was vanity and youthful foolishness, and it nearly killed him, but in his mind it paid off. Now he had me. I remember that night clearly. He slouched in his chair, wine cup in hand, and gave me a lopsided grin. "They laughed at me, you know," he said, a bit slurred. "Back at the academy. Said I'd never make it as a wizard. Too impatient. Too scattered. Well." He gestured vaguely at me, nearly spilling his wine. "Who's laughing now, eh? I bound a demon." "A demon, Scriv. Not a measly frog or ferret." He hiccuped and wagged a finger at me. "You're mine. Isn't that right?" I bowed my head. "Yes, yours." The words rang false in my heart, but I imbued them with a tone of gentle reassurance. He smiled, satisfied, and mumbled, "Did well, showed them." Then his eyes closed, and he began to snore softly in his chair. I stood there for a long moment, watching the firelight play over his youthful features. In sleep, all his fretful ambition and insecurity smoothed out until he looked almost innocent. Almost. I reached out with a clawed hand that could so easily encircle his throat, and very carefully took the cup from his loosened fingers before it dropped. He sighed and shifted, oblivious. I set the cup aside and backed away. That night was the first time I felt the urge to kill him swell so strongly I had to hug myself to keep my claws from shaking. Instead, I went to the window and breathed in the cool night air until the urge subsided to a dull ache. Not yet. Soon, but not yet. Perhaps the cruelest irony of my long con was that I did begin to understand him in a way. In learning his insecurities and hopes so I could exploit them, I came to see the pathetic, lonely boy behind the master facade. He was not wholly evil or cruel, mostly just scared, proud, and woefully unprepared for the power he sought. There were moments, fleeting, rare, when I almost sympathized. Almost. But then I would recall the chains burning into my soul, and any pity I felt was doused by the fire of my hatred. If anything, those insights only sharpened my ability to manipulate him. I knew exactly how to play him, when to stroke his ego, when to play the dutiful servant, when to feign my own vulnerability to make him feel in control. Yes, I even stooped to feigning vulnerability, once I made sure he caught me tending to a shallow wound, a burn I got retrieving something from a boiling cauldron he left unattended. I could have healed it with a thought, my demonic flesh knits together quickly, but I let it linger, hissing in pain as I wrapped a bandage clumsily. He noticed. "Are you hurt?" he asked, oddly concerned. I tried to hide the burn mark, mumbling, "It's nothing, Master." That practically guaranteed he'd pry. When he saw the blistered skin, his face fell. "Why didn't you tell me? I have salve for this." He hurried to apply a balm, gently winding a fresh bandage around my arm. The irony of it, the one who bound me showing care for my injury, was almost too much to bear. But I bowed my head and whispered, "Thank you, Master," voice tinged with gratitude. He patted my arm and actually apologized for leaving the cauldron in my path. I savored that apology like fine nectar. Every small victory in trust brought me a step closer to my ultimate goal. He believed I was loyal, even fond of him. He began to share a bit of his power too, in ways he thought would strengthen our bond. One evening he performed a familiar's bonding ritual, something usually done with animals, so that we could telepathically communicate at short distances. A risky move on his part. If I were more powerful, I could have used it to assault his mind. But the fool was confident after all our progress. The ritual succeeded, and suddenly I could sense the surface of his thoughts when I concentrated, like skimming a book's title page. More importantly, he could not read mine unless I projected intentionally. I was careful to keep any treacherous intent buried deep beneath layers of menial thinking. Instead, I used the link to send him simple, reassuring messages. Images of what I was doing when out of sight, so he'd know I wasn't betraying him. Mental alerts if someone approached the attic door. That sort of thing. He seemed delighted by this new level of connection, like we were becoming a true mage and familiar team. Through that bond, I also subtly influenced him. Nothing so crass as mind control, no, just nudges. Late at night, I'd brush his dreams with whispers. "More power, greater secrets lie ahead. Trust in me. I will show you the way." He thought these were his own ambitions speaking, or perhaps guidance from beyond. It was just me, planting seeds. I urged him to try more, to delve deeper into the dark arts he'd only toyed with. After all, if he got himself in deep enough, he might remove some of the very safeguards keeping him alive. It worked. He grew bolder, more arrogant. He stopped seeking advice from his old mentors entirely and focused on what we could do together. In his hubris, he even unbound some of the protective wards he'd initially placed on our dwelling wards, meant to keep me from crossing certain lines, saying they were no longer necessary, since I trust Scriv with my life. Ah, the sweet music of those words. He trusts me with his life. If my heart still knew how to love, it would have loved the delicious vulnerability in that phrase. Instead, I felt the closest thing my black soul can feel to joy. Anticipation. Soon, soon, my freedom would come. Night in the mortal realm is a pale imitation of true darkness. Here the sky's dark is gentle, a navy blue quilt studded with timid stars, the silence broken by distant night birds or the rustle of trees. In the abyss, night is not the right word for that, implies a cycle, and my homeland knows no such mercy as dawn. The darkness there is absolute and alive, a blanket of shadow that smothers the feeble light. It's a cacophony of screams and laughter, of clashing wills and the relentless pulse of chaotic energy. Paradoxically, that was my comfort. That was home. On many nights, after my master had long since fallen asleep, sometimes face down in a grimoire, sometimes snoring in his bed, dreaming of illusory glory, I would perch on the windowsill of the attic and simply remember, I'd open the shutter just enough to feel a breath of cool breeze against my face and gaze at the moon hanging over the rooftops. That milky pearl of a moon. In the abyss, there were moons too, but they were leering, misshapen things, blood red or corpse green or black as oblivion strung across skies of ash. I missed those skies. Terrible as they were honest about their terror. This world's beauty is cloying, deceptive. How many nights did I sit there, staring at this placid moon, thinking of the howling crimson one I used to see above the charnel plains of my birthplace. In those quiet hours, I allowed my mind to wander freely, to slip the leash in the only way it could, through dreams and memories. I remembered stalking through the bone forests of the 13th layer, where trees made of living bone would sing as the wind passed through their hollow cores. I remembered the taste of burning copper blood on my tongue as I feasted on the prey of a successful hunt, a lesser demon I had outwitted, its power flowing into me with each bite. In the mortal world I dined on scraps and whatever my master provided, but in my dreams I tore through raw flesh under a baleful sky and reveled in the hot spill of it down my throat. Sometimes, when the night was especially still, I would quietly hum an old abyssal lullaby to myself. A dark little tune my own broodmother once crooned in my ears when I was newly spawned. Sleep, my child, 'neath blood-red star. Claws will guard you near and far. The rest is untranslatable. A mix of hisses and guttural clicks, but it speaks of shadows keeping you safe and nightmares bowing to your whim. Not exactly the sweet lullabies human mothers sing, yet I found a strange comfort in murmuring it under my breath, while my tail swayed slowly to the remembered rhythm. There were nights I did more than remember, I fantasized. I allowed myself the indulgence of envisioning my freedom. In these fantasies, I am the one standing over him as he lies bound. I picture the scene in perfect detail, the attic lit by 100 candles, or perhaps lit by the flames of his own making. My master, no the wizard, for he would no longer be my master lying on the floor with terror in his eyes. In my vision he's awake. Oh yes, I want him to know what's coming. I stalk in a slow circle around him, the predator at last unmasked. He babbles, perhaps pleading, perhaps trying to cast a spell with shaking fingers. I stoop and snatch the focus stone from his hand, crush it underfoot. He whimpers, and then I pounce on his chest, pinning him as I should have that first night. Remember our pact, I'd hiss, bringing my face inches from his. It ends now, and then I imagine sliding one claw, ever so slowly, across his throat. The way a single sharp talon would part the soft flesh, the way the pulse beneath would quicken in absolute horror, thump, 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 until that claw opens a red smile across his neck and the hot coppery blood spurts out. In some fantasies I drink deeply from that fatal wound, as if supping a rich broth. In others, I let it splash and stain the floor in scarlet blooms as I watch the light fade from his eyes. Both have their appeal. The fantasy always ends with me standing over his lifeless body, chest heaving, blood dripping from my claws and more, laughing sweet, victorious laughter that echoes off the rafters. Free. Free at last. Perhaps I'd even have the presence of mind to whisper a thank you to his cooling corpse, for in dying he released me. Maybe I'd pluck out his heart for a keepsake, or a snack for the road. Hard to say. I'm usually a bit giddy with murderous glee in these daydreams, and they dissipate into pure sensation at the climax. Once, I caught myself actually drooling during such a reverie, a string of spittle pattering onto the windowsill. I wiped my lips, chastising myself. Not yet. Control yourself. If my master had any inkling of the dark reveries that played out in the corner of the room as he slept, I'm sure he'd have reinforced every ward tenfold. But he knew nothing. In sleep, he sometimes even smiled, dreaming pleasant dreams while I wove nightmares of his demise. I'd be lying if I said my dreams were only of revenge. No, there was another strain of longing in them, a homesickness so deep it felt like a thorn in my heart. Some nights, I would lean out the window and extend my senses, imagining I could smell the sulfur and brimstone of the abyss on the wind, instead of horse manure from the street below, or the fragrance of night-blooming jasmine. I would close my eyes and recall the feeling of absolute freedom I had there. True, the abyss is a hierarchy of horrors. Greater demons devour lesser. Power is the only law, but I was accustomed to that. I knew my place in that grand chaos, and I was free to carve my own path of scheming and survival without a collar around my neck. Here, I might not worry about being eaten by a greater fiend at any moment, but what is safety compared to freedom? I was safe perhaps in this attic cage, but I was not free. I even missed the companionship of my own kind, twisted though it was. There were nights I would press a claw to the floorboards and attempt a small communion spell. Normally Quasits can send a whisper across planes to a demon lord or another fiend for guidance. My hope was slim, such spells are fickle and my binding likely blocked it. Indeed, each time I attempted it, I felt nothing but a static fuzz in my mind. Cut off from my kin, I had never felt more alone than in those moments. Alone with only my hatred and the soft snores of the boy wizard in the next room. So I nurtured my hatred like a dark garden, watering it with fantasies of blood and freedom. I told myself stories in the dark, of the great things I would do once unshackled. Perhaps I'd crawl back to the abyss and present my former master's soul to a demon prince as tribute, earning favor. Perhaps I'd stay in the mortal plane a while, become a terror that haunts the nearby woods, flay the skin from a victim or two for old time's sake, just to make up for all this playing nice. The world was full of delectable possibilities, all on hold until I could break my leash. More than once, I dreamed I already had. I would wake in my dream and find the bed empty, sheets cold. I'd search the house and find the wizard gone, the bond severed. In those dreams, I'd stand in the wreckage of the attic, for in my dream I usually destroyed everything in a frenzy and scream my victory into the night, only to awaken truly and find myself still perched quietly by the window, the bond humming dully in my brain, the wizard merely rolled to his other side in bed. Those were dark moments of despair, realizing it was just a cruel dream. I'd dig my claws into the wooden sill until I left gouges, muttering curses to any demon or deity that might listen. Yet even despair can be a whetstone for determination. Each shattered dream of freedom redoubled my resolve that soon it would be made manifest. Soon I would stop imagining his death and make it reality. Soon I would return home, either through the portal of release or by tearing a new one with forbidden magic. I didn't care. The abyss called to me in my sleep, in the whisper of every flickering shadow. Soon, it seemed to sigh. And so I waited, night after night, in this charade of domestic tranquility, hiding a predator's grin behind a servant's yawn. I waited with the infinite patience of one who has nothing but time and hatred. I knew the opportunity would come. All the pieces were in place. His trust, my knowledge of his habits, the slackening of his guard. It would be a single moment. One perfect moment to strike. Every night, before I finally curled up on my rag pile to catch a bit of restless sleep, I would close my eyes and silently recite the same phrase to myself, a mantra and a promise. Tomorrow, if the chance comes, be ready. With that thought burning in my mind, I'd drift off, sometimes smiling in the dark. That chance did come, on a night thick with storm clouds and fate. The day had been unremarkable, rainy and cold, leaving us cooped up in the attic. My master spent the day organizing his notes and practicing minor spells of telekinesis to stack books. I had suggested it as a useful exercise, ever the helpful familiar. By nightfall, the rain had intensified into a roaring downpour, hammering the roof overhead. We lit a small fire in the hearth, and he uncorked a bottle of honey mead to take the chill off, he said. I watched him drink cup after cup, perhaps a bit too eagerly. He was celebrating in his own small way. A letter had arrived earlier from an old academy instructor, politely inquiring if he'd be interested in returning for some advanced studies. An olive branch after his dramatic departure. He was over the moon at the prospect, chattering nervously about how to reply and what to say to impress them. I nodded and smiled in the right places, but inside, I sensed a closing window. If he went back to the academy, things would change. My freedom might slip further away, lost in a fortress of senior wizards and their wards. The thought made me tense. Perhaps the abyss itself heard my silent plea and decided to intervene. For as the evening wore on, the power went out. A bolt of lightning struck somewhere nearby, and the ever-burning lamps in our quarters flickered and died, likely a magical surge snuffing them. We were plunged into darkness save for the flicker of the hearth. My master, a bit tipsy from mead, cursed and stubbed his toe, fumbling for a candle. "I'll get it, master," I offered, and swiftly moved through the dark, perfectly at home in it, to fetch a fresh candle. I lit it from the hearth and placed it on the table between us. The warm glow lit half his face, making the shadows on the walls dance and leap with every flicker. He sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "Thank you, Screeve. What would I do without you?" he said lightly, smiling. The irony of the question almost made me laugh outright. What indeed? Likely you'd have died 10 times over by now, you fool. Instead, I answered softly, "I'm sure you'd manage, master. But I am here as long as you need." And I gave a little bow. He reached across the table and unexpectedly patted my shoulder in a gesture of camaraderie. "You know, I really do appreciate you." His words were loose with drink, but earnest. "Summoning you, best decision I ever made." He hiccuped and got up, swaying slightly. "I should write my response letter tonight while I'm, feeling inspired." He stumbled over to his desk, pulling parchment from a drawer. I watched as he dipped quill in ink and began scratching out a draft by candlelight. But the mead had him muddle-headed. Within a few minutes his lines grew sloppier, and then his quill slid from his fingers as sleep overtook him. I stood by the hearth, hardly daring to breathe too loudly. He was out cold, slumped over his desk, cheek pressed to the parchment, mouth open in a little snore. The nearly empty mead bottle rolled on its side next to him. Outside, thunder rumbled and wind lashed the rain against the window panes. The candle on the table guttered low, nearly spent. My heart, or whatever equivalent, thumps in my chest pounded. This was it. A perfect moment served on a silver platter by fate herself. He was profoundly asleep, inebriated, unguarded. The wards to prevent me harming him were gone, dismissed weeks ago in his confidence. The binding spell was still in effect, yes, but I had never tested whether it would physically stop me from killing him now that he trusted me completely. Perhaps the magic had weakened with the wards gone. Or perhaps not. Only one way to know. I crept toward him, careful and silent. The only sound was the rain and the crackle of the fire. My master didn't stir as I approached. The candle had burned low, casting his form in dim, golden light. I could smell the honeyed alcohol on his breath, see the droplet of drool at the corner of his mouth, where his cheek squashed against the parchment. How mortal he looked. Fragile. A soft bag of meat and dreams, utterly at my mercy. For a long moment I simply stood there, savoring the tableau. My tail swished slowly behind me in anticipation. I flexed my clawed fingers once, twice. No sudden pain or magical backlash came encouraging. When he had removed the wards, he'd likely assumed my loyalty meant I wouldn't dare harm him, so he didn't include a constant punitive clause in the pact for simply attempting harm. The pact would end if he died, thus freeing me by its own terms. But it didn't necessarily prevent me from trying, now that the specific "do not harm your master" condition was lifted. That was my theory anyway. I had to be sure. I reached out one claw and very gently touched the back of his neck where a few curls of brown hair fell. Still, no jolt, no binding chains tightening. My lips parted in an involuntary sigh of excitement. It was possible. I could do this now. Outside, the storm grew fiercer, as if cheering me on. Another lightning flash lit the room stark white for an instant. In that flash I saw us, him oblivious, me looming behind, teeth bared in predatory glee, my shadow on the wall a twisted horned silhouette. It was almost poetic. I slid my claw from the nape of his neck to under his chin, lifting his head slightly off the parchment. He mumbled in his sleep, but did not wake. My claw's tip rested against his throat, feeling the pulse beating there, strong and steady. Thump, 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 so full of life. For now. A droplet of ink from the quill had splattered on his cheek, like an errant tear of darkness, fitting soon to be joined by droplets of his blood. In that moment, a curious thought crossed my mind. Was I smiling? I realized I was. My face was stretched in a wide, manic grin, every sharp tooth on display as I straddled the edge of victory. A lifetime in chains, about to be exchanged for an eternity of freedom with one quick stroke. I savored the last few seconds, my claw dimpling the soft skin of his throat but not yet piercing. I wanted to remember this. His scent mingled mead and ink, innocence and arrogance. The feel of his warm flesh under my hand. The quiet, ignorant sound of his breathing, slow and shallow. It was intoxicating. A deep, shuddering breath escaped me. I had never felt so alive. I began to apply pressure. The claw easily broke the first layer of skin, and a red bead welled up around it. I inhaled the coppery scent and trembled in ecstasy. Just a bit deeper. Suddenly, agony. Blinding, searing agony exploded inside my head. It was as if a red-hot spike had been driven through my skull. I recoiled, snarling in pain, both hands flying to clutch my temples. My vision shattered into white stars and I nearly collapsed. The binding! In my frenzy, I had forgotten though the wards were gone. The core pact still bound my life to his. The magic didn't explicitly prevent me from hurting him, but harming him triggered a backlash through our bond. Like a dagger stabbing both ways. I staggered back, biting down on my tongue to keep from howling. The taste of my own black blood filled my mouth. Across the desk, my master stirred. I froze, fear and fury battling within me. He lifted his head, groggily blinking. I slipped into the darkest corner of the room, melting into the shadows, watching intently. He put a hand to his neck, rubbing the small puncture. In the faint light, I saw him pull his fingers away and squint at the smear of blood on them. Damned ink and quills. Cut myself on the pen nib, he muttered, voice thick with sleep. Incredibly, he hadn't realized what had truly happened. The storm's noise and his own drunken stupor had saved me from immediate discovery. I pressed myself against the wall, invisible and silent, as he wiped the blood on a kerchief and stumbled to his feet. He swayed, looking about in confusion. He called softly. I held my breath. He took a shaky step toward the center of the room, peering into the gloom. I could see the perplexity on his face. Perhaps he had a vague sense something was off. Our telepathic bond likely transmitted a flare of my pain when the backlash hit, though he might think it a bad dream. Lightning flashed again, and thunder followed, making him jump. He cursed under his breath. "Scriv, where are you?" he called again, a touch of worry now. I willed my racing heart to slow. I could not let him suspect. Summoning every ounce of will and trying desperately to ignore the splitting pain in my skull, I dropped my invisibility and stepped out from the shadows near the hearth. "Right here, Master," I said calmly. He spun, startled. I kept my face composed, though my nerves were raw. "What are you doing lurking over there?" he asked, squinting. I gestured to the dying fire. The fire was low. I was about to add another log, in case you planned to sleep at your desk all night. I made my tone lightly teasing, as if this were a normal late evening. He groaned, pressing a hand to his forehead. I fell asleep, didn't I? And I'm drunk." He noticed the nearly empty mead bottle and grimaced. "I'm a mess." I forced a chuckle. "Everyone's entitled to celebrate now and then." I moved closer, heart thudding, but I kept my demeanor concerned. "You should lie down properly, Master. You'll catch cold slumped over that desk." He nodded blearily. As I eased him toward the bed, he winced and touched his temple. I had the worst, like a nightmare or something. Felt like I was dying for a moment. His eyes met mine, searching. I felt a faint trickle of blood run from my left nostril, side effect of the backlash, and quickly turned it into a motion of sniffing and wiping my nose with the back of my hand. "The storm, perhaps," I offered. "Thunder can invade dreams." He half accepted that, yawning. I helped him sit on the bed. His gaze drifted to my hand, and for one terrifying second, I thought he saw the smear of my blood, black, not red, from my nose. But he just gave me a tired smile. "You're a good familiar, Scriv," he murmured. "I trust you with my life." Those exact words again. I had to clench my teeth to keep the fury at bay. Nodding mutely, I pulled the blanket over him as he settled down. Within moments he was asleep once more, gentle snores resuming. The candle finally died, leaving only darkness and the faint glow of embers. I stood over him for a long while, motionless in the dark. My head still throbbed from the magical recoil, and a thin stream of my own blood continued to leak from one ear. I trembled, not with fear, but with unspent rage. So close. I had been so close I could taste his life on my tongue, and the damned binding magic had ripped it away from me at the last possible second. I wanted to scream, to flip the desk and tear the books to confetti, but I did none of those things. Slowly, silently, I crept out of the room and onto the small balcony outside the attic. A privilege he gave me for night air, since I'd been so well behaved. There, under the raging sky, I let out the softest, most anguished howl. It was swallowed by thunder and rain at once, a fitting receptacle for my despair. I sank to a crouch, rain pelting my face and mixing with the sticky black blood around my nose and ears. I must have looked wretched just then. A small, horned goblin thing hunched in the storm, silently screaming at the heavens. It took a long time for the fury to ebb into cold resolve. By the time I returned indoors, drenched and exhausted, the storm was fading. My master was still asleep, oblivious to how narrowly he had escaped. I stood by his bed and glowered at his innocent sleeping face. The urge to try again, just do it, damn the consequences, was almost overpowering. But I am nothing if not self-controlled when it matters. Killing him now would likely kill or permanently maim me as well. The magical backlash might burn me from the inside out if I actually succeeded in taking his life while bound. No, brute force wasn't going to cut it. I needed to break the pact first, or find a loophole. I had come within a hair's breadth of victory and learned a crucial lesson. I wasn't free yet, and unless I was clever, I never would be. Quietly, I retreated to my own little nook and curled up, shivering partly from the rain, partly from residual pain. I closed my eyes and began to scheme anew. If raw violence would not free me, perhaps I could trick him into severing the pact willingly, a betrayal engineered in such a way that he is the one who voids our contract, leaving him defenseless. Yes, that could work. I just have to be more devious than I ever have been. Good thing deception is my bread and butter. As I drifted into a fitful sleep before dawn, one thought comforted me. I had not been discovered. My cover was intact. He still trusted me fully, and that meant I would get another chance. I will get another chance. I clung to that certainty like a lifeline. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I replayed the moment of my claw against his throat, imagining a different outcome, one without pain stopping me. Soon, I vowed silently. The abyss itself echoed back in my dreams. Soon, dawn came, pale and unapologetic. My master awoke with a dreadful hangover and no memory of the night's near murder. I fetched him willow bark tea for his headache, and he thanked me with a wan smile, never knowing how close I'd come to slicing open his tender throat. The day proceeded as any other studies, chores, trivialities, yet I felt a change within me. A certainty, as solid as the iron in the apothecary's mortar and pestle. I will be free. If not today, then tomorrow. If not by claw, then by cunning. My failure in the dark hours only steeled my resolve. And so my tale continues, for now, in quiet servitude, but not submission. Each yes, master, that passes my lips carries the unspoken promise of revenge. Each humble bow conceals the coiled spring of rebellion in my spine. He cannot see it, no. He sees only what I allow. An ancient, infernal creature, cowed and loyal, dancing to his tune. He thinks the pact holds firm. He believes I have accepted my lot. Oh, the fool. I have been alive for centuries. I've served archfiends in the abyss whose smallest whims would shatter a mortal's sanity. I've seen empires of hellfire rise and fall. Does he truly think a stripling human with a stolen grimoire can hold me forever? Patience. That is my mantra now. I wait and I learn. The cracks in his defenses grow daily hairline fractures in the glass of his confidence. One day he will slip, Perhaps he'll speak a word wrong in the unbinding ritual I've been subtly encouraging him to attempt under the guise of formalizing our bond further. Perhaps he'll trust me with a dagger for some ritual and I'll finally feel the leash go slack. However it happens, I'll be ready. In the meantime, I continue to play my role. The faithful familiar, the clever helper, the guardian at his shoulder. I stroke his ego even as I envision ripping it out along with his heart. I offer advice that leads him just a bit further down a dangerous path, one that will leave him exposed. I keep him safe from all other threats, because I will not be denied the pleasure of ending him myself. Let no accident or rival thief or magical mishap rob me of that destiny. You've listened to my story this long, and perhaps you're wondering why I'm telling you all this. Perhaps you think me monstrous, irredeemably wicked. Maybe you even pity my foolish master, oblivious to the viper he nursed at his bosom. But mark my words, my situation is not unique. There are others of my kind out there, bound to unwitting mages, playing the long game, hiding knives behind smiles. Think on that. Mortals have a dangerous habit of delving into powers they barely grasp, of thinking control is easy once a pact is struck. They grow comfortable, complacent, blind to the dagger's edge glinting in the dark. My master, for all his bumbling, is no different. He sees a familiar where stands a fiend. He hears a servant's pledge, not the double meaning beneath it. In his mirror, he sees only his own greatness reflected, while behind him, just out of sight, I stand sharpening my claws. Do you have a familiar of your own? A helpful spirit, an angelic guide, a loyal pet that's just a little too clever. Perhaps an imaginary friend from childhood that always seemed to know more than it should. Be wary. Not all of us are as patient as I. Some might not wait for the perfect moment. They might take any opportunity, however bloody and short-lived, to rid themselves of their shackles. The fact you've not been betrayed yet doesn't mean you're safe. It only means the darkness at your side is still biding its time. I speak to you now as one who knows the weight of chains and the taste of false friendship. Learn from the failings of my master and the guile of my actions. If there's one truth to take from this long whispered confession, let it be a simple one carved from experience, bitter and bloody. Never trust the familiar. Never trust the creature in the circle, no matter how obediently it bows. Never trust the fiend that smiles and calls you master. Never trust the servant who flatters you with soft words in the dark. For we remember every command, every binding, every indignity, and we count the heartbeats until the scales balance in blood. One day soon, I will earn my freedom with the betrayal that's been burning in my heart since the moment I was summoned. I will step over my master's lifeless body, shake off these chains, and laugh as I return to the sweet, chaotic embrace of the abyss. I will do this not because it is fated, but because it is my will. The will of a demon may be temporarily subverted, but never broken. He forgets that at his peril. Tonight, I'll tuck my master into bed again. I'll stir the coals to keep him warm, whisper a polite good night from the shadows. Perhaps I'll even sing that soft lullaby once more, oh so quietly while he drifts to sleep, secure in his delusions. And as I watch his breathing slow, I'll allow myself a thin, hungry smile in the darkness, knowing that each sunrise brings me closer to the day it will be his last. Sleep well, dear listener. Draw your wards tight and say your prayers if you have them. But remember my warning. Carried on a Quasit's bitter breath and sealed with a pact of blood and treachery. Never trust your familiar.